As you learned when we looked at the two different types of nephrons, the juxtamedullary nephrons have a very long renal loop or nephron loop or loop of Henle, whichever you prefer. Now, those cells in the loop and also the cells of the collecting duct are cells. They metabolize, which means they've got to have nutrients and they've got to have oxygen. They receive these from that vasa recta, which is that long, straight network of blood vessels that pretty much just surrounds the nephron loop. So here you have your long nephron loop dipping down deep into the renal medulla, and here is your vasa recta. Okay, so when that nephron loop dipping way down deep into that medulla has fluids filtrate going down the descending limb of the loop of Henle and then turning to go back up the ascending limb of the loop of Henle, you've got two parallel tubes with fluid flowing in one direction and then the opposite direction, down and up. This is called countercurrent flow. Okay, now the vasa recta is going to take blood out and bring blood back. So that means in a long, straight structure, as you see here, the blood is going to be flowing down one side and up the other. That is also a countercurrent flow. Now, as we talked about earlier, the proximal convoluted tubule and the descending limb of the loop of Henle, that's where most of our water and most of our sodium ions are going to be absorbed. So, as those sodium ions are moving out from the filtrate into the extracellular fluid, the interstitial spaces of the renal medulla, then the concentration in those extracellular fluids is becoming more and more concentrated. So the osmolarity of the tissue fluids is becoming greater. Well, what happens when sodium moves and the osmolarity increases? Then water, we know, is going to follow even more. Well, that's leaving less and less water inside the renal tubules, right? So as we move now into the ascending limb of the loop of Henle, remember these cells, the walls of these that make up the cells that make up the wall of the ascending limb of the loop of Henle and the proximal convoluted tubule and most of the distal convoluted tubule are pretty much impermeable to water unless antidiuretic hormone is present. So we've removed lots and lots of water as we travel down through this pathway, or the filtrate travels down through this pathway. So we've got a really highly concentrated solution now with lots of ions. So as it gets into the ascending limb, those transporters are going to start pumping sodium and other ions out because the osmolarity was really high, right? So the water can't get out. These cells are impermeable. So that means that this fluid is becoming even more and more and more concentrated. The osmolarity of it is increasing as it moves further along that pathway. That's going to stimulate antidiuretic hormone to be released. Antidiuretic hormone then is going to affect the very last part of that distal convoluted tubule and also the collecting duct, and that's going to cause water to move through osmosis out of the tubular fluid and into that interstitial fluid again there in the medulla, and then from the interstitial fluids to move into the vasa recta. So that means a lot of water now is being lost from the tubular fluid. Less water is being retained in the collecting duct, and so that filtrate, which is now becoming urine, is going to be very, very concentrated. Less water will be excreted.